Your life is not stuck because you lack talent. It is not stuck because you lack motivation. It is stuck because your standards are low. That sentence may feel uncomfortable. Good. Discomfort is often the first signal that something true has been touched. Most people spend years searching for confidence, clarity, or direction, when the real issue is much simpler and much harder to face. They have been accepting less than what they are capable of becoming. Here is the reality most people avoid. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your standards. Goals live in your imagination. Standards live in your daily behavior. Goals are what you hope for. Standards are what you tolerate, enforce, and repeat, especially when no one is watching. And life does not respond to what you want. Life responds to what you accept. If you accept chaos, you get chaos. If you accept inconsistency, you get inconsistency. If you accept disrespect from others or from yourself, you get more of it. Many people say they want more from life, but their standards quietly say otherwise. They say they want success, but they tolerate distraction. They say they want confidence, but they tolerate broken promises to themselves. They say they want respect, but they tolerate behavior that slowly erodes their self-respect every single day. This audiobook is not about hype. It is not about motivation, and it is not about pretending everything will magically change tomorrow. This is about something far more powerful, raising the minimum level of behavior you allow in your own life. Because once your standards rise, everything else is forced to follow. Your time changes, your habits change, your relationships change, your identity changes. Most people try to improve their lives by adding more goals, more plans, more information. But real change almost always begins with subtraction. It begins with refusing to tolerate what weakens you. It begins with drawing a quiet but firm line and saying, "This stops here." Raising your standards does not mean becoming arrogant. It does not mean looking down on others. It means deciding that your life deserves structure, discipline, and self-respect. Standards are not rules you negotiate with your mood. They are not promises you break when things get hard. They are non-negotiables, internal laws that guide how you show up, even when no one is there to praise you. And here is the truth that separates those who grow from those who stay stuck. Standards are not enforced by motivation. They are enforced by identity. When something becomes part of who you are, you no longer debate it. You no longer rely on willpower. You simply act in alignment with that identity. You do not ask yourself whether you feel like showing up. You show up because that is who you are now. Most people never experience this shift. They live in constant negotiation with themselves, starting, stopping, promising, breaking, repeating the same cycle. Not because they are weak, but because their standards are unclear, low, or inconsistent. This audiobook exists to end that cycle. Over the next chapters, you will learn how standards actually work, why what you tolerate is shaping your future, and how to raise your standards in a way that is quiet, grounded, and permanent. You will learn how to stop relying on emotional motivation and start building internal rules that hold even on your worst days. This is not about becoming perfect. It is about becoming precise. Precise with your time. Be precise with your words. Be precise with your habits. Be precise with what you allow to stay in your life. Raising your standards will cost you something. It will cost you comfort. It may cost you certain habits, certain excuses, and even certain relationships. But what it gives you in return is far more valuable. Self-respect, clarity, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can trust yourself again. You will not need to announce this change. You will not need validation. Your results will speak for you. If you are ready to stop lowering yourself to meet circumstances and instead raise your standards so your life is forced to rise, then stay with me. Not for motivation, but for alignment. Not for noise, but for clarity. Because once you decide what you no longer tolerate, you decide who you are becoming. And that decision changes everything. Chapter 1. Your life is not random. Take a moment and look at your life right now, not the version you explain to other people, not the future you keep promising yourself, the real, ordinary life you wake up to every day, your routines, your energy, your discipline, your results. None of this happened by accident. Most people believe their life is shaped by luck, timing, or circumstances beyond their control. That belief feels comforting because it removes responsibility. If life is random, then failure is not personal. But the truth is far less comforting and far more powerful. Your life has structure. It follows patterns, and those patterns are created by the standards you live by. Here is the principle most people never slow down long enough to confront. Your life is not random. It is organized around your standards, not the standards you talk about, not the standards you admire in other people, the standards you enforce when no one is watching. Life does not respond to what you want. Life responds to what you accept. You can want confidence and still tolerate self-neglect. You can want success and still tolerate distraction. You can want respect and still tolerate broken promises to yourself. And life will always side with behavior, not intention. Standards are not dramatic decisions made during moments of motivation. They are quiet rules you follow in ordinary moments. They show up when the alarm goes off and you decide whether to get up or delay. They show up when work becomes uncomfortable and you decide whether to push forward or escape. Over time, these decisions stop feeling like choices and start feeling like identity. This is why standards are so powerful. They shape your life without asking for permission. Most people misunderstand standards. They think standards mean being harsh, rigid, or overly demanding. That misunderstanding keeps them stuck. In reality, standards are an act of self-respect. They define the minimum level of behavior you believe you deserve from yourself. When that minimum is low, life feels chaotic and reactive. When it is clear and firm, life becomes stable and focused. Low standards rarely look like failure. They usually look like almost disciplined, almost consistent, almost committed. And almost is where potential quietly disappears. A person with low standards still tries, still cares, still works hard at times, but their behavior changes with mood, energy, or circumstances. Their standards are conditional. And conditional standards always collapse under pressure. When life gets uncomfortable, comfort wins. High standards are different. They are not emotional. They are structural. They do not ask how you feel today. They state how you operate. This is why two people with similar intelligence, resources, and opportunities end up living completely different lives. One negotiates with themselves, the other does not. And negotiation always benefits the path of least resistance. If you want to understand your current standards, you don't need inspiration, you need observation. Look closely at how you treat your time, your health, your work, your money, and your relationships. The patterns you see there are not coincidences. They are evidence of the standards you have been enforcing. Standards reveal themselves through repetition. What you allow once becomes easier to allow again. What you allow consistently becomes normal, and what becomes normal becomes identity. This is why raising your standards feels uncomfortable at first. You're not just changing behavior, you are challenging familiarity. Your mind resists because the old pattern feels safe, even if it is limiting. Growth always disrupts what feels normal before it creates something better. Raising your standards does not require changing everything overnight. That approach usually fails. Real change happens through precision, not chaos. You raise standards one decision at a time in specific areas through non-negotiable commitments. You do not shout affirmations at yourself. You decide quietly and firmly what is no longer acceptable. No longer acceptable to wake up without intention. No longer acceptable to speak carelessly about yourself. No longer acceptable to leave important things unfinished. no longer acceptable to remain in environments that weaken you. Once a standard is raised, behavior has only two options: align or expose the gap. That gap is not failure, it is information. It shows you exactly where discipline must be applied and where identity must be strengthened. Growth does not require drama. It requires consistency. Your standards are shaping your life whether you acknowledge them or not. The only real choice is whether you define them deliberately or allow them to be shaped by comfort and habit. When you raise your standards, life has no choice but to reorganize around them. In the next chapter, we will confront a truth most people avoid. What you tolerate is never neutral. It is training you. And whatever you allow today is quietly deciding who you become tomorrow. Chapter 2. What you tolerate is training you. Every day, you're being trained, not by teachers, not by books, not by motivation. You're trained by what you tolerate. Most people assume tolerance is harmless. They think letting things slide keeps life peaceful. They believe ignoring small problems avoids conflict. But tolerance is never neutral. Whatever you allow to exist in your life teaches you what is acceptable, and what becomes acceptable becomes normal. Here is the uncomfortable truth. What you tolerate is training you for the future you will live in. If you tolerate distraction, you are training a distracted mind. If you tolerate disrespect, you're training yourself to accept less. If you tolerate inconsistency, you're training unreliability into your identity. This training happens quietly, without announcements. No one warns you that a single compromise will matter. But repetition is powerful. The mind adapts quickly to whatever it experiences regularly. Over time, tolerance rewires expectation, and expectation shapes behavior. Most people don't fail because of one big mistake. They drift because of many small allowances. They allow themselves to sleep late just this once. They allow themselves to skip effort when it feels uncomfortable. They allow themselves to stay silent when they should speak. Each allowance feels minor. Together, they form a direction. Tolerance teaches your nervous system what level of discomfort you are willing to endure. When that tolerance is low, the system seeks comfort automatically. When tolerance is high, discipline becomes normal. This is not about willpower. It is about conditioning. Your brain is always learning. It learns from what you repeat. It learns from what you excuse. It learns from what you ignore. This is why people often feel stuck without knowing why. They haven't made dramatic mistakes. They haven't ruined their life. They have simply been training a lower standard through daily tolerance, and that training compounds. Consider how tolerance shows up in subtle ways. Tolerating clutter trains mental chaos. Tolerating lateness trains disrespect for time. Tolerating negative self-talk trains low self-worth. None of these destroy your life overnight, but they quietly lower the baseline of what feels normal. And once something feels normal, it stops feeling wrong. This is the danger of tolerance. It makes decline feel comfortable. Most people wait for motivation to change what they tolerate. That approach fails because tolerance is not emotional. It is habitual. You don't break tolerance with inspiration. You break it with decisions. A clear decision about what ends now. Raising your standards begins with noticing what you've been allowing. Not judging yourself, not shaming yourself. Simply noticing. Awareness is the first interruption of automatic behavior. Ask yourself a direct question. What am I tolerating that is quietly weakening me? Maybe it's a habit that drains your energy. Maybe it's an environment that keeps you small. Maybe it's a relationship dynamic that erodes respect. Whatever it is, the cost is not just external. The real cost is internal. Every time you tolerate something that violates your values, you weaken trust in yourself. And self-trust is the foundation of discipline. This is why tolerance is so damaging. It doesn't just shape outcomes, it shapes identity. When you repeatedly tolerate what you know you shouldn't, you send a message to yourself, my standards are flexible. Over time, that message becomes belief, and belief becomes behavior. Breaking tolerance requires firmness, not aggression. You don't need to fight everything at once. You don't need to become rigid or extreme. You need clarity. Clarity about one thing at a time. Choose one area of your life where tolerance has crept in. Just one. Decide what is no longer acceptable there. Not someday. Not gradually. Now. That decision creates a boundary. And boundaries create structure. Structure creates stability. Stability creates momentum. At first, enforcing a new standard will feel uncomfortable. That discomfort is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that old training is being replaced. Your system is adjusting to a higher baseline. Stay calm. Stay consistent. Let repetition do the work. Do not announce this change. Do not seek validation. Do not explain yourself. Quiet enforcement is more powerful than loud declarations. Every time you refuse to tolerate what weakens you, you strengthen something deeper than discipline. You strengthen self-respect. And self-respect changes how you move through the world. It changes what you accept. It changes what you expect. It changes how others respond to you. Life always adapts to the standards you enforce. If you tolerate less, life gives you more room to grow. If you tolerate weakness, life reinforces it. There is no middle ground. Tolerance is always teaching. The only question is what it is teaching you to become. In the next chapter, we will go deeper into a critical shift most people never make. Understanding why standards must be rooted in identity, not rules. Because rules can be broken, identity is much harder to negotiate with. Chapter 3. Standards are identity, not rules. Most people try to change their life by creating rules. Wake up earlier, work harder, eat better, be more disciplined. And most people fail, not because rules don't work, but because rules are weak when they are not backed by identity. A rule is something you follow when it is convenient. Identity is something you live even when it is uncomfortable. That difference explains why so many people start strong and fade quietly. Here is the shift that changes everything. Rules can be broken. Identity is enforced automatically. When you rely on rules, every decision becomes a debate. You negotiate with your mood. You negotiate with fatigue. You negotiate with excuses. And negotiation always favors comfort, especially when no one is watching. Identity removes negotiation. When something becomes part of who you are, you stop asking whether you should do it. You simply do it. You don't need motivation. You don't need reminders. You don't need pressure. Behavior flows from self-definition. This is why identity-based standards are so powerful. They don't require constant effort. They require clarity. Most people say things like, "I'm trying to be disciplined," or "I'm working on being consistent." Those phrases sound reasonable, but they reveal uncertainty. Trying leaves room for escape. Identity does not. Compare these two statements. I'm trying to wake up early. I don't wake up late. The first invites negotiation. The second ends it. One is a goal. The other is a standard rooted in identity. This is how high standards are built. Not by adding more rules, but by changing the way you see yourself. You stop asking what you should do and start deciding who you are. Identity answers behavior before behavior even begins. But here is where most people get stuck. They try to change identity through words instead of actions. They repeat affirmations. They visualize outcomes. They say things they don't yet live. That creates friction, not transformation. Identity is not claimed, it is earned. Every action you repeat is a vote for the kind of person you are becoming. And the most powerful identities are built through small, consistent behaviors that align with higher standards. You don't become disciplined by declaring it. You become disciplined by acting in alignment when it would be easier not to. This is why standards must be specific. I value discipline is vague. I do not skip commitments I make to myself is clear. Vagueness creates loopholes. Clarity creates structure. Look at the identities that already guide your behavior. You likely don't debate whether to brush your teeth, speak your native language, or show up to certain responsibilities. Those behaviors are not rules you think about. They are part of who you are. High standards work the same way. They move from effort to instinct. To build identity-based standards, you must stop asking what feels right and start defining what is true. True about how you operate. True about what you allow. True about what you refuse. This process is quiet. It is internal. And it is uncomfortable at first, because changing identity means letting go of an old version of yourself. The version that negotiated. The version that made exceptions. The version that tolerated inconsistency. That version may feel familiar, but familiarity is not the same as alignment. Growth requires separation. You separate from behaviors that no longer match who you are becoming. You stop explaining yourself. You stop justifying. You stop lowering standards to protect comfort. This does not mean becoming rigid or extreme. It means becoming clear. Clear standards create freedom, not restriction. When identity is defined, decisions become easier. Energy is conserved. Mental noise disappears. Instead of asking, "Should I do this?" you ask, "Is this who I am?" That question simplifies everything. If the answer is no, the decision is already made. This is why identity-based standards endure under pressure. When stress increases, rules collapse, identity holds. You may feel resistance, you may feel discomfort, but you no longer question direction. Direction is settled. To make this practical, choose one area of your life where rules have failed you. Health, work, time, speech, pick one. Rewrite the rule as an identity statement, not "I should work harder," but "I finish what I start." Not "I want to be healthy," but "I don't neglect my body." These statements are not affirmations, they are commitments, and commitments require enforcement. Not through punishment, but through consistency. At first, your actions may lag behind your identity. That gap is normal. Do not panic. Do not retreat. Use the gap as feedback. Every time you act in alignment, you strengthen identity. Every time you don't, you see exactly where discipline must be applied. This is how standards stabilize. Quietly, gradually, permanently. Once identity changes, behavior follows without force. Discipline stops feeling like resistance and starts feeling like alignment. You are no longer pushing yourself forward. You're expressing who you are. And that is the difference between temporary change and permanent transformation. In the next chapter, we will address a question many people ask, but few understand. Chapter 4. Raise standards without motivation. Most people wait to feel motivated. They wait for energy. They wait for the right mood. And while they wait, nothing changes. Motivation feels powerful, but it is unreliable. It rises without warning and disappears just as quickly. When you build your life around motivation, your standards become unstable. You move forward on good days and fall back on hard ones. Over time, this creates inconsistency disguised as effort. Here's the truth most people don't want to accept. If your standards depend on motivation, they are not standards. Standards are meant to hold when motivation disappears. They exist to protect direction during moments of resistance. When life gets uncomfortable, motivation fades first. Standards remain if they are built correctly. This is where identity-based standards prove their value. When a standard is tied to who you are, action no longer requires emotional permission. You don't ask how you feel. You act because alignment matters more than comfort. Motivation becomes optional, not necessary. Most people misunderstand discipline. They think disciplined people feel more driven. They don't. Disciplined people feel resistance just like everyone else. The difference is that resistance does not change their behavior. They move anyway. Raising standards without motivation requires a shift from emotional decision-making to structural decision-making. Instead of asking, "What do I feel like doing today?" you ask, "What does this standard require?" That question removes debate. It turns action into execution. Execution is calm. Execution is boring. Execution is powerful. This is why high performers often appear emotionally neutral. They are not constantly fighting themselves. Their standards have already decided the outcome. The mind is quiet because the decision is settled. To build standards that do not rely on motivation, you must reduce choice. Choice creates friction. Friction drains energy. Energy loss invites excuses. Standards eliminate choice by defining behavior in advance. When behavior is defined, action becomes automatic. You don't negotiate with yourself at the moment of execution. You follow what has already been decided. This is how routines become anchors. A routine is a standard expressed through time. It tells your nervous system what happens next, regardless of mood. When routines are clear, motivation becomes irrelevant. The body moves before the mind starts questioning. But here is the mistake many people make. They try to raise too many standards at once. They overhaul their schedule, habits, and expectations overnight. That creates overload. Overload leads to collapse, and collapse leads to the belief that discipline doesn't work. Discipline works when applied precisely. You raise standards one behavior at a time, one domain at a time. You choose actions so small they feel almost unimpressive. But unimpressive actions repeated daily build unstoppable momentum. This is where most people quit. They want dramatic change. They want visible transformation. They underestimate quiet consistency. High standards are built through small, non-negotiable actions performed without emotion. Not because you feel strong, but because you decided this is how you operate. For example, you don't need motivation to show up on time if punctuality is a standard. You don't need motivation to train your body if neglect is not an option. You don't need motivation to work with focus if distraction is unacceptable. The goal is not to feel inspired. The goal is to remove alternatives. This requires honesty. You must admit where motivation has been your excuse, where you have been waiting to feel ready instead of acting aligned. That waiting is costly. It trains delay, and delay erodes self-trust. Self-trust is built through follow-through. Every time you act without motivation, you reinforce identity. You prove to yourself that standards are real. Over time, resistance weakens, not because tasks become easier, but because identity becomes stronger. This is why disciplined people often describe their actions as just what I do. There is no emotional story attached, no drama, no internal debate, just execution. Calm execution beats emotional intensity every time. To make this practical, choose one standard you want to raise without motivation. Just one. Define it clearly. Attach it to time or trigger. Remove ambiguity, then enforce it for 30 days without negotiation. Not perfectly, but consistently. Miss once, correct immediately. Don't spiral, don't explain. Standards don't require punishment, they require alignment. Correction is part of the process. At first, your mind will resist. It will suggest exceptions. It will ask for comfort. That resistance is expected. Do not argue with it. Let behavior lead. The mind will follow. This is how standards stabilize. Not through emotion, not through hype, but through repetition. When motivation fades, and it will, your standards remain. They carry you forward when feelings fluctuate. They keep your life moving in the right direction, even on days when you feel nothing at all. That is a real strength. In the next chapter, We will confront the hidden cost of low standards, not the obvious cost you already know, but the higher price most people never calculate until it is too late. Chapter 5. The hidden cost of low standards. Low standards don't ruin your life overnight. They drain it slowly, quietly, without warning. That is why most people underestimate the damage. They think the cost of low standards is temporary discomfort, a bad day, a missed opportunity, a small regret. But the real cost is far deeper and far more permanent. Low standards do not just affect outcomes, they erode identity. Here is the truth most people discover. Too late. Low standards always charge interest. You pay a little today. You pay much more tomorrow. Every time you tolerate behavior that weakens you, you make a withdrawal from self-trust. At first, the withdrawal feels insignificant. One skipped commitment, one avoided conversation, one day of delay. But self-trust compounds just like discipline does, and when it runs low, everything becomes harder. This is the cost no one talks about. When you stop trusting yourself, motivation disappears. When motivation disappears, consistency collapses. When consistency collapses, identity fractures. Low standards create a quiet internal conflict. You know what you should be doing, but you don't do it. That gap between knowledge and action creates friction. Over time, that friction turns into self-doubt, and self-doubt weakens every decision that follows. Most people don't feel this process happening. They just feel tired, unfocused, disconnected. They think they need rest or inspiration. What they actually need is alignment. Low standards create misalignment between who you want to be and how you live. Living in that gap is exhausting. It drains energy not because life is hard, but because you are constantly negotiating with yourself. Negotiation has a cost. Every internal debate consumes mental bandwidth. Every excuse trains avoidance. Every compromise reinforces the belief that your standards are flexible, and once standards become flexible, they collapse under pressure. This is why low standards feel safe in the short term, but dangerous in the long term. Comfort today becomes regret tomorrow. The pain of discipline feels sharp but brief. The pain of regret feels dull but endless. Most people choose the pain they feel immediately. Very few consider the pain they accumulate over time. Low standards feel easier now, but they create a future version of you that you won't respect. That loss of self-respect is the real price. When you lower your standards, you don't just lose progress, you lose credibility with yourself. And without self-credibility, confidence becomes performance. You say the right things, you plan the right goals, but deep down, you don't believe yourself. That belief matters more than talent. A person who trusts themselves will act even when afraid. A person who doesn't will hesitate even when capable. This is why low standards trap intelligent people. They know better. They see the pattern. But knowledge without standards creates frustration instead of progress. Awareness becomes weight instead of power, and that weight shows up everywhere. In work as procrastination, in health as neglect, in relationships as resentment. Low standards don't scream, they whisper. They tell you that tomorrow is fine, that one more delay won't matter, that you'll fix it later. Later becomes a habit, and habits become identity. Here is the shift that changes everything. Raising standards is not about punishment. It is about protection. You raise standards to protect your energy. You raise standards to protect your future. You raise standards to protect your self-respect. High standards are not harsh. They are stabilizing. They remove chaos. They eliminate constant decision-making. They create a sense of order that the nervous system can rely on. This is why disciplined people often appear calm. They are not fighting themselves every day. Their standards have already decided what happens next. Low standards, on the other hand, keep you in a constant state of internal negotiation. and negotiation is exhausting. It drains willpower, focus, and emotional clarity. The longer this continues, the more dangerous it becomes. Because eventually, you stop trying, not dramatically, quietly. You stop expecting more from yourself. You lower the bar so you can step over it. You tell yourself stories to justify the gap, and those stories become beliefs. Beliefs become behavior. Behavior becomes destiny. This is how potential disappears without noise. To reverse this, you must calculate cost honestly. Ask yourself a direct question. What is this tolerance costing me over 5 years? Not today, not this week. 5 years. Low standards always create delayed consequences. But delayed does not mean optional. The bill always arrives, and when it does, it is paid in regret, stagnation, and lost time. Time is the one thing standards protect most. When you raise your standards, you stop leaking time through indecision, avoidance, and distraction. You reclaim energy that was being spent managing guilt and excuses. Life becomes lighter, not heavier. This is the paradox most people miss. Higher standards create more freedom, not less. Freedom from chaos. Freedom from regret. Freedom from constantly negotiating with yourself. Raising standards hurts once. Living with low standards hurts every day. The question is not whether you will feel discomfort. The question is when and for how long. Discipline asks for effort now. Regret demands payment forever. In the next chapter, we will address the part most people avoid but cannot escape. The need to cut people, habits, and excuses. Because you cannot raise standards and keep everything. Growth always requires removal. Chapter 6. Cutting is a requirement, not an option. You cannot raise your standards and keep everything. Something has to go, usually more than one thing. Most people want growth without loss. They want a better life while holding on to the same habits, the same environments, and the same excuses. That desire is understandable, but impossible. Growth is not an addition problem, it is a subtraction problem. Here is the truth most people resist. Raising standards always requires cutting. Cutting is uncomfortable because it feels like loss. But what you are really losing is weight, dead weight. Things that quietly pull you back to old levels, even as you try to move forward. Low standards survive through clutter. Cluttered schedules, cluttered environments, cluttered relationships, cluttered thinking. When everything stays, nothing rises. Most people assume cutting means becoming cold or extreme. It doesn't. Cutting means choosing alignment over attachment. It means recognizing that not everything deserves a place in the next version of your life. There are 3 areas where cutting becomes unavoidable. People, habits, excuses. Let's start with people. Not everyone who has access to you deserves influence over you. Some people drain energy without intending to. Some normalize behaviors you are trying to leave behind. Some only feel comfortable when you stay the same. Their presence may feel familiar, but familiarity is not support. You don't need to attack or explain. You don't need to announce anything. You simply reduce access. Distance is a boundary. Silence is a decision. High standards require environments that reinforce them. If the people around you constantly pull you back to old behaviors, your standards will always feel heavy. Not because they are wrong, but because you are enforcing them alone. Next comes habits. Habits are easier to defend than people because they don't argue back. That's why they're dangerous. A habit may seem small, harmless, or deserved. But habits train identity, and identity enforces standards. Every habit answers one question. Is this making my standards easier or harder to maintain? If a habit weakens focus, discipline, or self-respect, it must go. Not gradually, not someday. Clean cuts create clarity. Partial cuts create negotiation. And negotiation always benefits comfort. This doesn't require perfection. It requires honesty. If a habit pulls you backward, you already know. You don't need more information. You need enforcement. Finally, excuses. Excuses are the most protected attachment people have. They defend them aggressively because excuses protect ego. They make inconsistency feel reasonable. They turn avoidance into a story. I'm tired. I've been busy. Now isn't the right time. These statements are not lies, but they are not leadership either. Excuses lower standards quietly. They make exceptions feel justified. Over time, those exceptions become the rule. And once excuses are normalized, discipline collapses. Here is the hard truth. As long as excuses exist, standards are optional. Cutting excuses does not mean ignoring reality. It means refusing to let reality dictate identity. You acknowledge difficulty without surrendering direction. You act aligned even when conditions are imperfect. This is where many people stop. Because cutting feels lonely at first. You feel the absence of old patterns. You feel the quiet where noise used to be. You feel resistance from people who benefited from your lower standards. That discomfort is temporary. What replaces it is clarity. When you cut what weakens you, energy returns. Focus sharpens. Decisions simplify. You stop spending mental effort managing contradictions. Life becomes quieter and more powerful. This is why high standards often come with solitude. Not isolation, solitude. Solitude gives standards room to stabilize. It removes interference. It allows new identity to take root without constant challenge. Over time, the right people align naturally, but that comes later. First comes separation. Cutting is not dramatic. It is calm. It is deliberate. It is final. You don't keep revisiting decisions. You don't reopen doors you closed for a reason. You move forward without resentment. This is discipline at its highest level. To make this practical, choose one thing to cut. Just one. One habit that weakens you. One excuse you repeat. One source of noise that pulls you off course. Do not replace it yet. Do not justify the cut. Simply remove it. Let the space exist. That space is not emptiness. It is potential. It is where higher standards begin to feel natural instead of forced. It is where identity stabilizes. Most people fear cutting because they think they will lose comfort. What they actually lose is friction. Friction from constant compromise. Friction from living below their own standards. Once friction is gone, progress accelerates. Cutting creates momentum, because when less pulls you back, more moves you forward. In the next chapter, we will shift from removal to construction. We will focus on the daily standards that build self-respect. Small, precise behaviors that quietly transform how you see yourself and how you move through the world. Chapter 7. Daily Standards That Build. Self-respect. Self-respect is not a feeling. It is a result. You don't wake up one day suddenly respecting yourself. You earn it, quietly, repeatedly. Through the standards you live by when no one is watching, and the most powerful standards are not dramatic. They are daily. Here is what most people misunderstand. Self-respect is built in ordinary moments, not during big wins, not during public success, but in small, private decisions you make every day. After cutting what weakens you, there is space. That space must be filled with structure. Without structure, old habits return. Daily standards are what stabilize your new identity. They give your nervous system something consistent to rely on. Daily standards do one critical thing. They remove ambiguity. When behavior is ambiguous, excuses thrive. When behavior is defined, discipline becomes automatic. You stop asking yourself what to do. You already know. Most people try to improve their life by chasing intensity. They want powerful routines, extreme discipline, or perfect systems. That approach fails because intensity is unsustainable. What lasts is precision. Precision looks boring. Precision looks simple. Precision works. Daily standards are not goals. They are minimums. A goal is something you aim for. A standard is something you do regardless of mood. Standards don't ask for motivation. They operate on agreement. For example, I want to work harder is vague. I start my workday focused, without distraction. For the first 60 minutes is a standard. Clarity eliminates negotiation. Daily standards should be small enough to be repeatable and strict enough to be meaningful. If a standard does not create slight resistance, it is too low. If it creates overwhelm, it is too high. The right standard challenges you without breaking you. This balance matters, because self-respect grows from consistency, not heroics. Every time you meet your own standard, even in a small way, you reinforce trust in yourself. That trust compounds. Over time, you stop questioning your ability to follow through. Confidence becomes grounded instead of emotional. This is why disciplined people appear calm. They are not constantly proving themselves. They already trust themselves. Daily standards work best when they are tied to specific domains. Your time, your body, your work, your words. Start with time. A person with self-respect does not treat time casually. They begin their day with intention. That does not require a perfect morning routine. It requires one clear decision: how the day starts. Waking up at a consistent time, avoiding immediate distraction, or beginning with a defined task builds momentum before excuses appear. Next is the body. You do not need extreme training to build self-respect. You need consistency. A daily movement standard, hydration standard, or sleep standard signals one message to your nervous system: I take care of myself. That message matters more than intensity. Then comes work. Daily work standards are about follow-through. Finishing what you start. Showing up focused, doing the uncomfortable part first. When you consistently meet your work standards, your sense of competence rises. And competence is a pillar of self-respect. Finally, your words. How you speak to others and to yourself reinforces identity. Daily standards around speech eliminate self-sabotage. No exaggeration, no self-mockery, no careless promises. Words shape perception, and perception shapes behavior. This is where many people fail. They set standards, but don't enforce them gently. They miss once and turn it into a story. They judge themselves. They spiral. That reaction does more damage than the miss itself. Standards do not require perfection. They require correction. If you miss a standard, you return to it immediately. No drama, no punishment. Correction maintains identity. Overreaction weakens it. This calm enforcement is critical. Self-respect grows when you respond to mistakes with firmness instead of emotion. You don't abandon the standard, you reinforce it. Daily standards also protect against emotional volatility. When emotions rise or fall, standards keep behavior stable. You don't need to feel good to act well. You act well because that is your baseline. This creates freedom. Freedom from mood. Freedom from chaos. Freedom from inconsistency. Over time, these small standards accumulate into something powerful. You begin to see yourself differently. Not because you say different things, but because your behavior tells a new story. I am reliable. I follow through. I don't abandon myself. That internal narrative matters more than any external praise. Most people chase self-esteem through achievement. That path is unstable. Achievement rises and falls. Self-respect built through daily standards is stable. It stays when circumstances change. This is why high standards feel grounding instead of stressful. They simplify life. Fewer decisions, less internal debate, clear direction. To make this practical, choose one daily standard in one domain. Just one. Define it clearly. Make it non-negotiable. Then enforce it for 30 days without modification. Not perfectly, but consistently. Let repetition do the work. Let behavior teach identity. Let self-respect grow quietly, without announcement. You don't need to feel different right away. The change will show up in how you move, how you speak, and how you decide. Others may notice. That doesn't matter. What matters is that you do. In the next chapter, we will address the final layer, how to maintain high standards long-term without burnout, ego, or external validation. Because raising standards is one thing, never lowering them again is another. Chapter 8. Never lower your standards again. Raising your standards is difficult. Keeping them high is harder. Most people experience a short period of change. They feel strong, focused, and disciplined. Then life pushes back. Stress increases. Fatigue appears. Old habits call quietly. And without realizing it, standards begin to slip. This chapter exists to prevent that. Here is the reality most people overlook. Standards don't fall suddenly. They erode gradually. They fall through small exceptions, through unspoken compromises, through moments where enforcement feels inconvenient. That is why maintaining high standards requires strategy, not emotion. The first principle is this: high standards survive through environment, not willpower. Willpower is temporary. Environment is constant. If your surroundings reward low standards, discipline will always feel heavy. If your surroundings support high standards, discipline becomes natural. This includes physical environment, digital environment, and social environment. Clutter invites distraction. Noise invites reactivity. Chaos invites compromise. A clean environment does not make you disciplined. It removes resistance. When resistance is reduced, standards are easier to maintain. This is not about aesthetics. It is about alignment. Next comes ritual. Rituals lock standards into time. A standard without a ritual is fragile. A ritual turns intention into structure. Morning rituals, work start rituals, and end-of-day rituals create predictable anchors that stabilize behavior even when emotions fluctuate. Rituals are not meant to be impressive. They are meant to be repeatable. 5 minutes done daily beats 1 hour done occasionally. Rituals signal to your nervous system that standards are not optional. They happen regardless of mood. But environment and ritual alone are not enough. The third element is silence. High standards are protected by silence. Most people weaken their standards by talking about them too much. They announce change. They seek validation. They explain themselves. That explanation invites interference. Silence removes interference. When no one knows what you are building, no one can question it. When no one is watching, ego stays quiet. You are not performing discipline. You are practicing it. Silence is not secrecy. It is containment. Contained standards grow stronger. They are enforced internally instead of socially. You don't rely on praise to stay consistent. You rely on identity. This leads to the most important rule. Never negotiate your standards in moments of emotion. Emotion distorts judgment. Fatigue, frustration, and stress all invite compromise. That is why standards must be decided in advance and enforced later without debate. You don't decide standards when you're tired. You follow them when you're tired. If you find yourself justifying exceptions, pause. Ask one question. Is this aligned with who I am becoming? If the answer is no, the decision is already made. This question cuts through emotion quickly. It returns authority to identity. You stop asking what feels good and start asking what is true. Another threat to high standards is ego. Ego turns standards into image. Image invites performance. performance invites burnout. When standards become a way to feel superior, they collapse. True standards are quiet. They are not used to judge others. They are used to guide yourself. The moment you need recognition, your standards become external, and external standards are unstable. They rise and fall with attention. Internal standards endure. They are enforced even when no one sees them, especially then. To maintain standards long-term, you must accept this truth. Discipline is seasonal. Identity is permanent. There will be periods of high intensity and periods of maintenance. High standards do not require constant pressure. They require consistency. During difficult seasons, you may reduce volume, but never lower the baseline. You don't abandon standards. You simplify them. This distinction matters. Simplifying protects identity. Lowering erodes it. For example, you may train less intensely, but you don't stop moving. You may work fewer hours, but you don't abandon focus. You may slow down, but you don't drift. Baseline standards stay intact. This prevents the most dangerous pattern of all or nothing thinking. Many people either push aggressively or collapse completely. High standards reject both extremes. They favor steadiness. Steady standards outlast motivation. Steady standards outlast emotion. Steady standards outlast circumstances. This is how long-term transformation happens. Quietly, without drama, without announcements. To make this practical, define your personal code. 5 standards, no more. Standards that govern how you start your day, how you treat your body, how you work, how you speak, how you respond under pressure. Write them down, keep them simple, enforce them calmly, review them weekly, not emotionally, objectively. When you slip, correct immediately. When you succeed, say nothing. Let results speak. Over time, something important happens. You stop worrying about whether you are disciplined. You stop chasing motivation. You stop fearing regression. Your standards have become part of you. They no longer require effort. They require presence. This is the final shift. You don't raise your standards to impress anyone. You raise them to protect who you are becoming. Once raised, they are not lowered. They are living. And when standards are lived, not negotiated, your life stabilizes at a higher level permanently. Chapter 9. Emotional control is a standard. Emotions are not the problem. Uncontrolled emotions are. Most people believe emotions are something that happens to them. They feel angry, discouraged, anxious, or unmotivated, and assume those feelings dictate behavior. That belief quietly lowers standards because it gives emotions authority over action. Here is the reality disciplined people understand. Emotions are information, not instructions. They signal something. They do not decide on something. When emotions are allowed to dictate behavior, standards collapse under pressure. You act differently depending on how you feel. You say things you later regret. You abandon commitments because discomfort feels urgent. This is not freedom. This is reactivity. High standards require emotional control, not suppression, not denial, but mastery. Mastery means emotions are acknowledged without being obeyed. You feel anger without acting recklessly. You feel fear without retreating. You feel resistance without stopping. That separation is power. Most people think emotionally strong individuals feel less. They don't. They feel just as deeply. The difference is that feeling does not equal action. There is space between emotion and response. That space is a standard. Emotional control is not built in moments of calm. It is built when emotions are high and behavior remains steady. When you choose restraint instead of reaction. When you pause instead of escalate. When you stay silent instead of explaining. Silence is often the highest form of control. When emotions rise, most people rush to release them. They vent, they justify, they externalize. That release feels relieving, but it trains impulsivity. Over time, the nervous system learns that emotion must be discharged immediately. That pattern weakens standards. High standards teach a different lesson. Emotion can exist without action. Discomfort can exist without escape. Pressure can exist without collapse. This is how emotional resilience is built. Practically, this begins with one rule. No major decisions during emotional spikes. When you are angry, exhausted, insecure, or overly excited, your perception is distorted. Any decision made in that state risks lowering standards. High-standard individuals delay decisions until emotional neutrality returns. Delay is not avoidance, it is discipline. Another emotional standard is response timing. You do not respond immediately to provocation. You do not explain yourself under pressure. You do not defend your standards emotionally. Reaction gives power away. Control keeps it. This does not mean becoming cold or disconnected. It means becoming selective. You choose when and where emotion is expressed. Expression becomes intentional instead of impulsive. Over time, this changes how others experience you. People sense steadiness, they sense boundaries, they sense authority, not because you dominate, but because you are not easily moved. To build this standard, start small. Choose one emotional trigger you frequently encounter. Annoyance, criticism, delay. Observe your impulse. Then pause. Count breaths. Do nothing for 10 seconds longer than you want to. That pause is training. Every pause increases your capacity. Over time, emotional storms shorten. You recover faster. You stay aligned longer. This compounds into composure. Composure is a standard few people have, and it changes everything. In the next chapter, we will address the final layer of high standards, how to live with them without becoming rigid, isolated, or burned out, how to balance discipline with humanity. Chapter 10. High standards without burnout or ego. Many people fear high standards for one reason. They think discipline leads to exhaustion. They think control leads to rigidity. They think high standards turn life into constant pressure. That fear is understandable, but incorrect. Burnout does not come from high standards. Burnout comes from internal conflict. Conflict between who you are and how you live. Conflict between what you know and what you tolerate. High standards remove that conflict. Here is the distinction most people miss. High standards simplify life. Ego complicates it. When standards are driven by ego, everything becomes performance. You measure yourself constantly. You compare. You push beyond capacity to prove something. That path ends in exhaustion. When standards are driven by alignment, behavior feels clean. You do what is required and stop. You don't overextend. You don't seek validation. You don't need applause. This is sustainable discipline. High standards do not require intensity every day. They require consistency. Some days are strong. Some days are light. The standard is not effort level. It is direction. Direction matters more than pressure. A disciplined life includes recovery. Rest is not weakness. Rest is maintenance. High standards include standards for rest, silence, and disengagement. Without them, discipline turns aggressive and collapses. With them, discipline becomes stable. Another protection against burnout is flexibility within standards. Standards define the baseline, not the ceiling. You don't punish yourself for off days. You protect the minimum. This keeps identity intact, even during difficult seasons. You do not abandon yourself when life is heavy. You simplify and continue. Ego-driven discipline says, I must do more. Aligned discipline says, I must remain consistent. That difference prevents collapse. High standards also require humility. You don't judge others. You don't preach. You don't need to be right. Judgment externalizes discipline and weakens it. When standards become a weapon, they turn inward eventually. True discipline is personal. It governs your behavior, not other people's. This humility keeps standards light instead of heavy. Finally, long-term standards require perspective. You are building a life, not a streak. You are shaping identity, not chasing moments. Misses will happen. Delays will occur. What matters is response. Correction over criticism. Continuation over drama. This mindset keeps standards alive for decades, not months. When discipline is aligned, life becomes quieter. When life is quieter, focus sharpens. When focus sharpens, progress accelerates. This is the final understanding. High standards are not about control. They are about peace. Peace that comes from knowing where you stand. Peace that comes from trusting yourself. Peace that comes from living without internal negotiation. When standards are clear, life stops pulling you in different directions. You move forward calmly, steadily, without noise. And that is the highest form of strength. You've reached the end of this audiobook, but this is not an ending. It's a decision point. Everything you've heard comes down to one simple truth. Your life does not change when you feel inspired. It changes when your standards become non-negotiable, when what you tolerate shifts, when what you accept becomes precise. Most people keep waiting for confidence, waiting for motivation, waiting for the right moment. That waiting is the trap. Standards don't wait for feelings. Standards decide behavior in advance. They carry you through ordinary days, tired days, and difficult days. They protect direction when emotions fluctuate and circumstances push back. If there is one idea to carry with you from this entire journey, let it be this. Your future is shaped by what you refuse to tolerate. Starting now, not tomorrow, not next month. Now. Raising your standards does not require perfection. It requires honesty, honest recognition of where you've been negotiating with yourself. Honest acknowledgement of what you've been allowing that quietly weakens you. Honest acceptance that staying the same has a cost. You already know where your standards need to rise. You feel it. You felt it for a long time. That feeling is not guilt, it's awareness. And awareness is an invitation. An invitation to stop drifting, an invitation to stop explaining, an invitation to live in alignment. Alignment is quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't seek validation. It shows up tomorrow and does what it said it would do. Then it does it again the next day, and the next. That is how trust is built. Not by believing in yourself, but by proving to yourself, through follow-through, that your standards are real. When you trust yourself, confidence stops being emotional. It becomes grounded. You don't need to raise standards everywhere at once. You only need to raise them somewhere. One boundary, one habit, one decision you enforce calmly and consistently. Momentum follows clarity. Clarity reshapes identity. Identity reshapes behavior. This process is slower than hype, but faster than regret. There will be days when old habits call quietly. That does not mean you're failing. It means you're human. The difference now is that you don't negotiate. You correct, you return, you continue. No drama, no punishment, no stories. Correction is strength. Remember this. High standards do not make life harder. They make it simpler. Fewer decisions, less chaos, less internal debate. When standards are clear, energy is conserved. Focus sharpens. The mind becomes quieter. You stop reacting and start directing. This is why people with high standards often appear calm. They are not fighting themselves. They are aligned with themselves. You don't need applause for this. You don't need approval. You don't need permission. The work you are doing is internal, and internal work changes external results, whether anyone notices or not. If others don't understand your boundaries, that's fine. If others feel uncomfortable with your growth, that's normal. Your responsibility is not to be understood, it is to be aligned. Standards are not about control, they are about clarity. Clarity about who you are becoming. Clarity about what belongs in your life. Clarity about what no longer does. Once that clarity exists, your life reorganizes itself around it.